and we try to end right at 1. We appreciate your willingness to spend lunch hour with us. So first things, I just want to introduce myself and Atara. So my name is Lorraine McGuire. I'm the Vice President of Development and Marketing here at Sexual Assault Center. Atara Abdullah Mohammed Smith is our development specialist, and she is going to be helping facilitate this. And then we obviously have Cara Tuttle Bell, who's going to be presenting today from Project Safe at Vanderbilt. But I just want to let you know you did sign up for this, and we are going to be talking about some potentially triggering things like intimate partner violence, domestic violence, sexual assault. So if for some reason you feel triggered in any way, please feel free to hop off and take care of yourself. I'm also going to put SAC has a 24/7 crisis line that you can call at any time. It's not if you're just in immediate crisis, but you also, if you feel triggered, you need to talk and process. If you hear a disclosure and you're unsure what to do, or if you know of something and you need to know the steps to take to report, you can call anytime 24/7. We also have language services. So, sorry, I'm trying to talk and do that. And so I added that. And then throughout the presentation, if you have questions, we ask that you put them in the chat with the group. You can send them to me directly if you're uncomfortable, or to Atara, putting them in the entire group so we can keep those anonymous. And then obviously, Cara will give us her contact information if you have any follow-up questions from there. But I'm sure we'll have some more people trickle in, but I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Cara.
Okay, thank you. I am very happy to be here today. And I'm going to talk about the intersections of domestic and sexual violence. And since it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, I was just going to start on a little bit of that because I'm coming as you. I'm trained as a lawyer. I supervise a team of victim advocates and prevention educators at Vanderbilt University. We provide the campus community with prevention education and victim support services, but we're very happy to work with community partners. And we try to raise awareness and provide education and stimulate culture change on campus, with the goal of people who live and learn here going out and changing their communities. So it should be part of the ongoing educational cycle for them. And you know, they live and exist in all other spaces off the Vanderbilt campus, and we want to take all of those resources with them as well. So I wanted to just set this within the context of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And obviously actions have been happening globally for decades. In US history, we have this becoming more formalized, becoming more on the national radar in the 80s. And initially it wasn't necessarily making clear connections between sexual violence. It was focused, you know, on domestic violence, on an understanding of often physical abuse, not only, but often physical abuse occurring in the home, predominantly impacting women and children. And, you know, it started like many movements do. There was a day of action, then it expands into a week, and then it becomes, you know, an awareness month. Due to a lot of organizing and lobbying, it does then result in national organizations getting the attention of Congress, of the president, and now we have a really annual recognition of the issue. And that really matters. It really does make a difference. Like, we find that, like, when I'm on campus and I try to wear a lot of purple in, you know, October, and then the people who talk to me, like, at campus dining, it's such a great starting point for entering the conversation. So I just want you to think of, like, you could tell someone about this lunch and learn you attended today, and you have no idea where that conversation is going to go, right? Or if you're going to meet someone or connect with someone to help. So sometimes the work is that easy and that small, but we're all doing it together. And then I really do hope that you learn more as we talk throughout today. That's very useful for you. So again, Domestic Violence Awareness Month, sometimes we like to separate things into clean categories. Lawyers definitely do. Legal definitions sometimes are not our best educational tool or necessarily capturing the whole reality of domestic and sexual violence. And so these months, these serve a lot of purposes. A lot of the education in the program serve purposes, and we want people to understand and be able to learn and think in digestible pieces. But what we're talking about today really is connected, right? So deeply connected and sometimes overlapping. You can think of Venn diagrams. There are a lot of these type of tools. I'm going to show you some in just a bit later in the presentation, because I'd like to give different learners different ways to think about this. But sometimes domestic violence has a sexual component and sometimes it doesn't. And so it intersects in this way. Obviously, I want to think about intersectionality in another way, which is that identity matters and identity shapes the experiences of the types of violence and the ability to get care. And so we'll talk about those intersections as well in just a moment. Okay. So originally, the sexual violence within domestic or dating violence was a gap, right? In the research, in the conversation. It could have been an invisible part. Certainly survivors talked about it, but it wasn't getting the same level of attention necessarily, partly because it's not always as visible, right? So sometimes the physical injuries are difficult for survivors to hide, and that became kind of the talking point. Like if you notice bruising or a black eye or something or some other physical injury, to start that conversation. So programs like this are really designed to remind you that sometimes the injuries are not visible, right? I mean, this is private violence. Sometimes the abusers are very strategic about how they may or may not leave marks on people who experience these types of harm. But that this could be the entire type of violence and abuse that's occurring could be sexual in nature, and that would also constitute domestic violence, even though that's not necessarily what we often see in TV and film or conversations, or even a lot of Domestic Violence Awareness Month programming. But consent matters, and this is just so deeply tied really to a lot of things that are going on politically as well. These are all aspects of consent, who is making decisions, bodily autonomy. These are conversations we're having around a lot of issues nationwide, about protections for trans persons, about reproductive rights. And so now is absolutely the time to be having these types of conversations and better understanding the intersections, because, you know, this I hope is informing how we vote in coming days, and how we lobby and how we engage, because we don't want to go back to a place where some of these intersections are not understood, because then we're not meeting the needs of people in our community. Then we can be causing unintentional re-traumatization and harm. It's just very important to understand that for many, many people in abusive situations, they're living at these intersections indeed. It's a common part. You see a statistic there at the bottom of the slide. About 40 to 45% will also experience some sort of sexual assault by their partner. There is disproportionate risk. There is a matter of timing. You may already understand this if you've attended programs that might be considering domestic violence on its own or sexual violence on its own. And so, unfortunately, the expectations you might be bringing into this, we see play out, you know, in the research when we're talking to people about their experiences. Those with disabilities, those who are pregnant, those who are at the time where they're trying to leave their partner, they face the highest risks of intimate sexual partner violence. And they face those risks over time. So it could be a one-time sexual assault within the context of a dating or domestic violence situation, but we find that it then occurs multiple times, particularly over the year or over the phase of violence. If in other programs you've heard about the cycle of violence. It could be something that just rolls right into that cycle. And the type of sexual activity, the type of sexual violence that is occurring within the domestic violence relationship often does include more physical aggression and force and injury as well. So it is a bit different than some of the other types of behaviors. There are other impacts to consider, which is often that if there are children in the home, they see at least a portion of this. They may see the beginning of the intimate sexual partner violence. It may be in the context of an escalation of a fight that may occur in a common shared space, but then conclude in a private space. But children are witnessing this as well. So it's not just about the target or the survivor's experience of the assault, but what this is doing to the home environment and the potential impact upon any witnesses, any other family members, right? This becomes in an environment with a power differential of coercion, of intimidation, because these things are taking place in that geography. And of course, there are long-term impacts as well. When sexual violence is part of domestic violence, we see some of those impacts compounded or heightened. That means that the effects could be more severe. They could be longer term. People cope with anxiety, then insomnia, depression. All of these then get exacerbated by the different types of harm that are occurring. And so the interventions around this are crucially important. And so there have been efforts, and perhaps you've heard of some of these, to train stylists, right, to witness some of or observe some of the signs. If they're seeing people on a regular basis, they become a really great person to do an intervention, because you can track behavior changes over time and get a sense as if someone is just changing something about their behavior. So it could be they're normally put together, which I try to be, but then they notice that I am showing up differently in the space, or just running late. Like when you start to run late, you don't seem as happy. There may or may not be physical injuries to detect. So stylists offer a point of intervention. Obviously, training healthcare providers does as well. Now, depending on the person, they may not be seeing them on a regular basis, but they should really have this opportunity to do a screening, to ask about safety. Perhaps you've had some of these questions asked before. You may or may not have known why this is happening, but this is progress in this area. This is a form of activism and education. Do you feel safe in the home? Sometimes questions are about firearms in the home. And then they're being increasingly trained to consider, if someone's coming in with certain types of injuries, to ask if it was connected to domestic violence. And we saw that happening in emergency rooms, especially depending on time of day for the injury. There's sometimes a seasonal nature to this. If alcohol is involved in an incident, there's all these different screening considerations that one can make. But also, when we think about the sexual violence connection, it becomes very important to understand that nurse practitioners, nurses, OBGYNs, midwives, right, everyone providing this type of care also is very well positioned to do the types of screening and to track sexual health over time, and to maybe educate also about the risks to pregnant persons, and ask very well reasoned questions based on the data about their safety and their relationships, and then provide resources and information. Ideally, they're alone in these conversations with doctors and nurses and other care providers. Although even myself around here, since I moved to the South, I've noticed that people are always welcoming my partner to go back with me. And because of the work I do, I'm always like, oh no, you shouldn't be asking that, because it's really then a missed opportunity. I mean, it was a real life example where I'd fallen down the stairs in the house and was worried about my wrist, went in to get an x-ray, and they were like, your husband can come on back. But then like my work self was like, what if that had been a result of an interaction with him? And there I've lost my chance to tell someone what had happened. So just putting that out there in case that's useful to someone, or if you have the opportunity to have those conversations with your care provider, and you can now explain like why we really don't want necessarily people to come back with you. Now, there are times where I might want my supportive partner with me, but it should really be like the choice of the patient, right? So we've got to think about these norms and comfort level and way we might be building rapport that could get in the way of us having conversations and making connections, where we need to ask really personal questions. And that sexual violence component feels very, very personal to a person who might already be very reluctant, with good reason, about talking about abuse taking place within the relationship. Okay, so here's where I'm going to start to give you some different visuals. There's some source information there. I want you to know where I get those so I can give credit where credit's due. But here is a way in which every situation might be a bit different. And we're shaped in all sorts of societal factors and structural barriers. Systemic racism plays in. Current, political movements are shaping who might feel comfortable connecting with what resource, when, where, why, and how. I mean, all of that factors into these experiences and a person's ability, belief in help-seeking behaviors, right? So who would they come forward to connect with and why? And I say this to you to know that like there's not one go-to path, right? In my work, I talk to a lot of parents of college students. That's, I'm situated on the college campus. They care deeply about their child, of course they do. We work with a lot of students. We work with students, faculty, and staff, so it could be anyone. But the parents, often call with very specific ideas about what a person needs to do. And this does play out in gendered ways. There's research for this that I'm happy to talk to people about at another time. I'm a nerd about all of this, so really do feel free to reach out to me with any questions. Hopefully we can get to them today, but if not, I love follow-up conversations about this. But a lot of the dads call and they want everything reported to the police. And I say that, like you can see here, is some of the behaviors are not necessarily going to be criminalized. Some of them are going to be very difficult to prove. But something to understand, if that's like your default assumption, like when you come in, is that most of the time people just want the abuse to stop, right? Or they want to leave the relationship safely. They want to take care of their health. So it's not always the first thing on the agenda for safety planning and survivor care for the people who come in and working with us. And so you have to just check. This is just an example about like your faith in a certain support network or reporting option may make sense for you, but does not make sense for the other person. Does not make sense based on response rates that they've seen and experiences that people who share their identity have had. And that's really, really crucial to consider when we're trying to support people who are experiencing domestic or sexual violence, but especially when those are occurring simultaneously. One thing else to know is that the sexual violence within intimate partner relationships is sometimes hard to prove, right, in a court of law. Certainly these things are taking place in private areas, typically by design. But what's really challenging in the context of an ongoing relationship is differentiating the consensual sexual activity from the non-consensual sexual activity. And so we see a lot of really harmful, re-traumatizing treatment of survivors if they're trying to go forward in that way. And address intimate partners' sexual violence within the criminal justice system, because it's just not as well understood by, I would say, anyone involved, right? Not just juries that if we might end up with, but really anyone, right? Because we like to think of things in clean categories. The law considers categories. Definitions really matter in the law. And so when we add the context of love and abuse and family dynamics, it just becomes very difficult. So consider how getting a person support, helping them take steps to ensure their safety, those are really the overarching goals. And then, reporting options are something to consider, certainly, but we want those to be really driven by the survivor who knows their experience best. Now, when we see domestic violence, also including sexual violence, we know that the risk of intimate partner homicide is really high, like at its highest. And so obviously every relationship can be different, but there can be some trends, right? Where the domestic abuse, which could be physical or economic control, the controlling behaviors that you may think about in terms of falling under the term domestic violence, usually start small, right? Like a lot of times people don't show their true controlling nature, their full nature early on. People find things that they like about people, they fall in love with people, right? This is how you get into these relationships. So the sexual partner violence often comes after some of the other warning signs or types of domestic violence. So we can track this in terms of risk as a risk of escalation, right? So when you add the sexual violence component to an already existing domestic violence situation, we would interpret that like the researchers or professionals should interpret that as heightened risk, as escalating behavior, right? If you then are including something like strangulation, that's a very concerning warning sign to us too. Escalating behavior that we're worried about could result in severe physical injury or intimate partner homicide. And so there's a connection too. And again, different people face heightened risk. If we talk about trans people, they are facing rates of violence higher. You may already know that and be familiar. Those statistics are true when we consider the categories individually, domestic violence or sexual violence, but intimate partner sexual violence then remains true. If you take the factors that contribute to an environment prone to discrimination and consider all the ways in which a person is experiencing this type of discrimination, that then is going to really be a strong predictor of them experiencing these types of harms. That's how the disproportionate impact works. It can make them more susceptible or vulnerable in certain ways, and then that discrimination means there are fewer resources, certainly fewer like culturally competent. Some shelters are really restrictive based on gender identity, and the options are not the same in all geographies, right? The tactics can vary in terms of threatening to out a person in some way. This is really an area where there are stark concerns, right? So very, very high rates of violence depending on race, ethnicity, ability, gender identity, sexual orientation. Those intersections absolutely matter. Now, here are two different other visuals that I wanted to show you. Those of us who do the work, we often are familiar with something called the power and control wheel. There are different versions of that. Here is one that is giving you examples of what intimate partner sexual violence might look like. And it does really play out in some specific ways. So the sexual activity could start consensually, then include increasingly physically abusive behaviors, but it also could be distrust, threats, following, stalking related to wondering if someone's having an affair. It can be exposing someone to humiliation or abuse by talking about sexual activity in front of others, by coercing them to engage in sexual activity they wouldn't, normally choose. Forced participation with others. And then something that just seems really, really at the forefront right now are the ways in which reproductive rights are currently being limited in the country, and how then that increases vulnerability to that type of abuse right now in many states for people who are navigating reproductive issues, who may also be in a domestic abuse situation. For those of us who want to have these conversations with people who are trying to do outreach, some just considerations of language. I thought this was useful to include. One thing that's really important to remember, and maybe it's because I'm trained as a lawyer and I talk to lots of lawyers, but everyone doesn't know exactly what to call, like what meets a definition or a criminal statute definition of what they're experiencing. So you want to ask questions or broach the conversation in really accessible ways, like in an inclusive way as well. The word I hear most often in the work is uncomfortable, right? And then I would suggest you just mirror that back, right? If someone's talking to you about this uncomfortable situation, or they're uncomfortable with a person, you can just ask, why was that uncomfortable, right? You don't have to jump to the were you sexually assaulted type of language, which can feel like an attack, right? So remember that at this intersection, vulnerability can be high, shame can be high, fear can be high. And so consider the ways in which you're using language, because what we're trying to do really is support people, right? What we're trying to do is support people, get them help, get them information, raise awareness. And so we don't want to be doing that in scary, off-putting ways. And when you consider identity, social class, education level, income, all of this is connected to how aware and how much understanding already exists or not. And so we just don't want to get in our own way of helping people. We talk about intersectionality a lot. It's become a buzzword, right? But I want us to really know what that means. And so here are some specific examples of how these things work together and what living at the intersection actually means. So where can the control come in? Where can the coercion come in? Or the barriers to accessing care? I grew up in a rural area in Indiana, very rural, lots of cornfields around there, even just in the context of being a young woman, had barriers to care, because a lot of the young women my age went to like our county health nurse to get contraception, but that woman was friends with my mom. They worked at the school together. Like, I just didn't feel like a place I could go, right? Like, I really did think I had like one option. Of course, this is a little bit pre-internet, so now we can Google some more things, but you can see how not having the full access to information then restricts your choices, even when you're not dealing with the trauma of an abuse situation. So the women where I'm from now, they don't think that they have a place to go. There's no shelter probably within 60 miles. Now, it is a community in which women help other women, and there's like a whisper network, and there's some safety planning going on there. This is directly connected to the work that I do, because my mother was experiencing domestic violence in the home, and my aunt. And this was just something that was sadly normalized in that environment. And I don't think any of them could have identified a support service that felt accessible to them. So what are they doing, right? They're safety planning with each other. They're offering some shelter to each other, but then that's inviting risk, right? So if my dad wanted to go follow my mom to my aunt's house, he definitely knows where my aunt lives, right? And he also would assume that's where my mom was going. And going late at night, there's few gas stations, there are like no hotels. Like, think of the map. There are many, many places that are this role. Now I sit here in Nashville with options of within just a block of places I could go and be in public, and where I could connect with. Like, we have a security team on campus. there's things that I could think through, but if I were to experience this in Jasonville, Indiana, where I grew up, my town of 2,000 people and one stoplight, all of a sudden many barriers come back up, right? Even for me, right? And I am like 45-year-old white woman who works at Vanderbilt. Like I've got options, but depending on where even I am, right, barriers can come up. So we have to really understand that saying like, why don't people just leave? Those types of assumptions are skipping over so many considerations, so many considerations. We probably know this. You've self-selected to be here today, but think about the ways in which you can educate others around this topic. We'd make a lot of assumptions about different types of relationships, and I hope that's more unconscious bias than conscious bias, but you should also seek out unconscious bias type trainings to work on things like that as well. So you're not carrying it over into your activism or your care in trying to address this issue. Even within the communities, there's a lot of assumptions about which types of relationships, like within the LGBTQ community, for example. There for years was assumed to be no relationship abuse taking place in lesbian relationships. So we have decades where there's little to no research. It certainly remains underfunded, but that then created certainly less visibility, less awareness raising, less education, feelings of isolation, right? And often some shame related to, why is this happening to me? It doesn't seem to be happening to others, that really just kept us from adequately addressing that type of domestic abuse, considering the sexual abuse within it. These are just examples for you to be thinking through. I've talked a number of times about barriers to seeking care, but I wanted to give you some concrete examples of those as well. A lot of very well-meaning people go into the work that we do, at the Sexual Assault Center, at Vanderbilt's Project Safe Center, at all kinds of state coalitions and organizations. In my opinion, this is Cara's opinion, all of this type of care remains woefully underfunded, inconsistently funded, underfunded, which means we are relying upon a lot of volunteers to do the work, and kudos to those volunteers, absolutely. But it does then mean that there's often some inconsistent education and awareness, and we just don't have the captive audience to professionally train everyone doing this kind of work in ways that could be really helpful. So when a person who has some particular aspect of identity, or there's a cultural consideration that's shaping what has happened to them, shows up in a center, it really just depends on who is responding. It can depend on who's answering a hotline, and their understanding of who's showing up in their space. So those barriers remain really real nationwide. Now, everybody's trying to work on it in an under-resourced environment, right? So what I'll say here, to put a plug here, is if you have any influence on budgets, priorities, things like this, you have the ability to bring people in for a training, ask, because there are people like me, people who work at the Sexual Assault Center, the Tennessee Coalition, who we say, yes, we want to come in, right? If you have a place to bring us to do this type of education and outreach, ask us. We want to come in and do this, and we know it's happening inconsistently. Okay. On the right, you see some barriers to reporting for immigrant and refugee women. I can tell you, even on campus here, when issues about immigration status and we see hate crimes on the rise, other incidents, of hate speech, that absolutely impacted our immigrant population from wanting to connect with us on the Vanderbilt campus. I saw a switch from walk-ins or drop-ins to more anonymous hotline calls. Now, I'm glad that people felt comfortable calling the hotline, but the fear was high, right? And this was starting around 2016, where our demographics served, around our international students and scholars on campus changed dramatically. The trust was not even something that you're like, that it wasn't that we changed what my office did. It's not like the community org is changing what they did, but this is how politics shapes how a person is assessing their risk in connecting with the resource, right? Because like their visa status matters. Are they going to be able to reach someone who speaks, their language? Well, that varies widely, right? And so the isolation has really increased around that in recent years, as we've seen, unfortunately, a series of very violent crimes occurring nationwide, some of which are clearly about gender-based violence, some of which are not. But I think once you begin to unpack them, you see those connections there, and some of the speech and things like social media posts of the sometimes the gunman or the person who's committing the harm. When you dig deeper, you see how these things are connected. So please know we've got a lot of work to do there to repair trust that maybe existed before because of things that not your organization is doing necessarily, but that are happening around us. This is another, framing of the power and control wheel, another set of examples, just to reinforce things that I've already been talking with you about today, about why really understanding this intersection is so crucial. If we get it wrong, we're missing things. We're missing warning signs. We're missing opportunities for intervention. We're missing aspects of safety planning that can be life altering. And so you've got to think holistically about the issue with the really particular concerns and considerations for the survivor, the individual, but also for the survivor in a relationship, in a family. Like, where are they sitting in connection with other humans as we're trying to help them? This is why this matters so much. As I'm working towards the conclusion of my remarks, this just feels so urgent to me that I wanted to do as a particular plug on the connection here of not missing this as a reproductive health and rights issue. Okay, so the news media does what the news media does, right? They need to attract clicks. They want to get a headline. They also need to make it in a digestible soundbite. So a lot of times we're skimming now. We don't always read anything. We've got like less of an attention span, and very, very well earned. We've all been going through a lot, but it does mean then we might not be pulling these concerns out of our current dialogue about reproductive rights in the United States, right? So I'm worried about many, many things related to what's going on in the states since the Supreme Court issued their Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade, right? So you might be following these headlines. And that means when we make the conversation seem really binary about like it is about abortion, or framing it in terms of being pro-life or pro-choice, we are missing the impact to human lives. We are not considering the many, many ways in which this has increased risk to all sorts of people. I'm concerned about all of them, right? But it's not just a matter of choice. It is a matter of life and death. And it is a matter of an ability to build a healthy relationship and maintain a healthy relationship. Human beings can do that when they have bodily autonomy. Human beings can do that when they have support resources available to help them, right? So we don't want someone to come forward to a medical provider who've we trained to be aware, and then that person sitting there not knowing what they're legally allowed to do. And we're seeing this happen where they're like then debating, running decisions up the like healthcare organization, deciding someone has to drive 6 hours, right? To have left your abusive partner and then be gone for 6 hours is going to raise some questions, right? I mean, I'm most concerned about getting the person the medical care that they need, but we are increasing the likelihood that the abuser will know something, will respond, will find them, right? There are just so many ways in which the the risks are heightened right now. So when you vote on this issue, know that this is a part of it, right? Like this is why context matters. This is why we can't make things so black and white. This is why we really need to be informed, is that people are understanding the full nature of risks that are around this decision. And this does feel, I mean, this may feel more politically motivated or partisan than the conversations that you're typically having. It is maybe more direct than I often am in giving talks like this, but I just do feel a sense of urgency and want people to realize how high stakes it is, because we are seeing this in the work that we do. We're seeing these considerations, we're seeing these fears, we're having these conversations. Okay. Now, it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. There are always ways to get involved. I like to leave people with, an action plan and a way to feel like there's progress happening, because there is. We are making progress. I don't want to just give a message of that's discouraging and it is concerning, but I want to leave you with hope. So please know that there are many different ways to be involved, many different organizations, many online tools related to this, but I know the folks at the Sexual Assault Center are doing good work, so I want to put a plug in there and say you absolutely could go and donate. They would be very happy to put your dollars to good use. But time, you have other resources other than dollars. Not everybody has that. And so just think about ways you can show up, raise awareness. You can wear purple, right? You can tell someone that you attended this talk. Hopefully there's something new that you hadn't thought about today. And we just have a few days left in October, but there's no reason you can't continue this all year long, for sure. And here, I just want to leave you with my contact information, which is actually not on the slide, but there's my name. You can certainly find me. I'll just tell you that I pretty much have all my stuff in alignment. So if you are on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, it's all Cara Tuttle Bell. One word, just make it one word, and you'll be able to find me on those. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. I do work at Vanderbilt, so you can find me there too on the website. Everybody on my team chose the work. I'm very passionate about it, and we work within the educational environment by design. So please feel free to reach out if there's any aspect of this you want to talk about. And then now I'll give it back to you in case we have any questions.
Thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation. So much good information, so many great statistics on there that are just so very helpful as we're having this conversation. I would be remiss, first of all, thank you. Never once have we ever had a partner say donate, but we love that. SAC is doing legislative work right now. We have a petition that I'm going to share, and we're trying to get as many people to sign this petition. We are asking for exceptions for abortion access to rape, incest, and human trafficking survivors. So if you would like to read our petition and sign that, please do. We're trying to we have almost 7,000 signatures, but only about 1,500 of those are from Tennessee. And so we're using this. We've met with many lawmakers. I've met with, I believe, 3 people from the House and 4 senators. And a lot of them just say, like, we really want to hear that our constituents care about that. How many signatures do you have in my area? And so we want to use this as an opportunity to really show them that people, pro-life, pro-choice, like you said, it doesn't matter. This isn't political. This is a matter of people and of resources and choices when they don't have choices. And it's not a black and white issue. And it's been made political, but it's just not. It just makes sense for us as a society to care about victims of domestic violence. And we don't even have an understanding. I mean, people can't even still comprehend that a partner can rape their spouse, and speaking in very, cis male, female, that a husband can rape his wife because she's always supposed to be sexually available. And once you've consented with somebody, like, then it's always like permanent consent. So we don't know, we don't have those, that's still something that we're really struggling with. But domestic violence is something where we have come a long way, I think, I hope. We still have a long way to go in this intersect, but they say it takes a generation. So thank you so much for being part of this generational change that we're trying to make. Does anybody have any questions? We have about 15 minutes left. So we want to have some times. I think I probably had maybe some questions about, you mentioned drop-ins. So I'm going to start with the question, but again, feel free to message Tara or I if you don't want to put it in publicly. But you mentioned drop-ins and people coming to the center and how that's, so do you see people other than Vanderbilt students? Is anybody welcome at your center, or is it just for students?
It is for students, faculty, and staff. So
Okay.
anyone who works at the university can access our services. However, we have a 24-hour hotline as well. People call it from all over the nation, and so we just then provide referrals. So we'll take the call. We don't do any screening, and nobody has to prove to us who they are. So we'll take the call and try to help anyone who connects. But it is designed to be a campus office.
Awesome. I know that we would love to, we learned a little bit before this call. I was not aware that you can get a medical legal exam or a rape kit done at your center. So I think we need to start getting the word out there. I had a Vanderbilt staff, a medical staff, a nurse, say that Nashville General was the only hospital you can get a rape kit done. And so how we can work together to it's information sharing. That's what this is about. So like Cara was saying, it's so important for all of us on this call to share information, to disseminate that. It's the information everybody hopes they never need to know, but it's so important if they do need to know. So let me see. I don't know that we have any questions that have popped up, but is there anything else that you just want to share about your center, what you do? Anything along those lines?
I mean, yes. I'll always talk if you give me the chance. So let's see. What might I say? I mean, there's a lot of talk about Title IX as well. Title IX really impacts colleges and university campuses. Maybe that's not as interesting to everybody, but it's another example of how activism, organizing, lobbying really makes a difference, because I have seen lots of progress. Now, a lot of the headlines about Title IX are not positive. The feelings about it are not necessarily positive. It's a federal law. But I just want to leave people with this, that like in the past 5 years, I've witnessed incredible change on college and university campuses, huge surges of education now required to provide to them. So it does take generations, but we're like the college and university students should be getting education at every college and university. We are now seeing increased requirements in the K through 12 environment. So I'm really hopeful by this, right? This is taking a law that came about. It's actually the 50th anniversary of Title IX. But it's like the year. So I've been doing talks about this. So it was passed, in 72. This is a civil rights movement, women's movement, law that's not new, but continues to expand. A lot of people knew about it in terms of athletic participation, but it's really gotten instrumental in addressing sexual harassment, sexual assault, dating violence, stalking in the university setting, not just for students. But this is driving expectations beyond higher ed, right? Because we're graduating classes of students, every year. I always tell them to pull the sexual misconduct policy off the shelf of wherever they go work, right? Think of ways you could be involved in the workplace about revising these things, at least increasing resources, observing Domestic Violence Awareness Month, observing Sexual Assault Awareness Month. There is always something that you can do where you are. I'm housed on the college campus, come from a long line of teachers, so it's not random. We just, the power of education. But the point is that we're sending people out in society, right? So where do you sit? Like in a church, in a book club, in a in a family. There's so many opportunities to continue the work where you are. But on the tough days, if you're really struggling to see where progress is, give me a call and I'll give you a list, right, of all of the things that have been happening, because it's tough. It's hard. It's tough work worth doing, but I can really promise you that for those of us who do the work, we do see it. We do see it. We see it at the individual level. I try to do it at the institutional level, and we're seeing it at the societal level, but it absolutely takes all of us.
Yes, it definitely does. Well, I will call you sometimes because every once in a while I'm like, well,
Yeah, I know.
my therapist says you need to find the light. I'm like, I'm looking for the light. So this
Listen,
is
I'm
good.
stomping across campus a lot where people are like, "Hey," and then I'm like, "Oh, I gotta pull myself out," right?
Let's do
But we
that.
should do that for each other.
Yes. Well, does anyone have any ideas that they want to share of how we can utilize the rest of this month or anything, like even when it comes to, I'm sure you have plenty of resources on your page that people can share. Uh,
Yeah.
Anything along those
Oh,
lines
sure. Let me type in our VU Project Safe Instagram, because I've got a great team of interns, students, we're hiring peer educators, my staff. They
Yeah.
put out a lot of content, which absolutely, please push that out and share
Yeah.
that. And then a lot of the programs we do at Vanderbilt are open to the community. I mean, we do lots of online talks too. And so if anyone wanted to join our listserv, um, that is something that is available to everyone. The ongoing services may not, but the educational piece, absolutely. I teach a class in the spring, the seminar on gender and violence. If anybody wants the syllabus or recommended reading, I'm happy to do that as well.
That is fantastic. Well, share that and we will do good on hopefully better on sharing your content and vice versa. Friday. SAC has an events page that you can go on for Lunch and Learns. Our next one coming up is on our Safe Bar, and that is November 11th. If you would like to learn more about Safe Bar, we are trying to figure out how to get this onto college campuses for fraternities and sororities, having these conversations.
Okay.
We do get a lot of pushback on it because then there's an admission that there's drinking on campus, and when you don't have the age of people who should be drinking, then we can't admit to anyone drinking. But having just sent our oldest off to Emory University like 2 months ago now, I think it's just so important, and to have those conversations, and those drug detection coasters are important. And just, yes. So if you can join us on November 11th, we would love to have you. The registration is on our and I can put the link to, but if you just go to sacenter.org and get involved, let's see, events. I'm going to put that right here, and you can sign up and register. And we also have all of our trainings on here. So we have our community meetings for the legislative work we're doing. We have those on here. There's an event tonight. So we got all kinds of good stuff on there. So check it out. And I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day.